The dry Kentucky earth crumbled between Mason Tate's fingers like the memories he tried to forget. 47 years old, with shoulders that still carried the invisible weight of his service, Mason had come to this small patch of land to disappear. 3 years since Afghanistan. 3 years of trying to sleep through the night. 3 years of jumping at car backfires and flinching at sudden movements. Today was about fixing the water line that fed his modest farmhouse. Nothing more. The June heat pressed down on him as he worked the shovel into the resistant soil. His property stretched to the edge of a wooded area that locals called Widow S. Grove, a name Mason never asked about. The farm had belonged to his late uncle, a man he'd met exactly twice in his life. When the lawyer called about the inheritance, Mason had been living in a veterans' housing complex in Louisville, working security shifts and drinking himself numb on his days off. "You got family land," the VA counselor had told him. "That is more than most get. A place to rebuild." Mason wiped sweat from his brow and continued digging. The water line had been giving him trouble for weeks, pressure dropping to nothing when he needed it most. Like now, with drought settling over Milridge County like a wool blanket. The shovel hit something solid. Not pipe. Stone. Mason crouched down, brushing away dirt to reveal what looked like the edge of old masonry, circular. He dug wider, exposing more of the curved stonework. "Well, cover," he muttered to himself. He hadn't known there was a well on this part of the property. It wasn't a T on any of the survey maps. As he cleared more earth, a faint sound reached him. So faint he thought it might be the wind playing tricks. He paused, holding his breath. There it was again. A sound like someone breathing. Mason felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the prelude to the anxiety that had followed him home from war. He forced himself to breathe. "Just the wind," he said aloud. But the sound came again, and this time, it formed something that made his blood run cold. Help. The word was barely audible, a whisper so weak it might have been imagination. But Mason Tate had learned in Kandahar to trust what others dismissed. That instinct had saved his unit more than once. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the old stones. "Hello?" he called, feeling foolish. "Is someone there?" Silence stretched. Then, "Please." The voice was small, young, female. Mason's hands moved before his mind could process what was happening. He began pulling at the stones, decades-old mortar crumbling under his fingers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he worked, clearing the opening of what was now clearly an old well, sealed and buried. As the opening widened, he called down again, "I come here. I come going to get you out." A sound like a sob floated up from the darkness. Mason ran to his truck, grabbed his flashlight, and returned to shine it down into the well. The beam caught nothing but stone walls disappearing into darkness. He adjusted the angle and saw water glinting far below, and something else. A pale face looking up at him. A girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old. Dark hair matted against her skull, eyes reflecting the light like a wounded animal. "Jesus Christ," Mason whispered. He fumbled for his phone, but stopped. Something about the girl's appearance struck him as wrong. Her clothes, they looked like something from another time. And her face was too pale, too gaunt. "How long have you been down there?" he called down. The girl's lips moved, but he couldn't hear her response. "I'm calling for help," he said, reaching again for his phone. "No," this time her voice carried clearly. "They put me here." Mason froze. "Who put you there?" "The town," she said. They all knew. A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the well's depths crawled up Mason's spine. He looked toward Milridge, the small town visible in the distance, its water tower and church steeple rising above the tree line. "What is your name?" he asked, turning back to the well. "Eliza Corwin." The name hit Mason like a physical blow. He'd seen it on a faded missing persons flyer in Earl and S. Diner when he first arrived in town. The waitress, Miss Grady, Sheedy told him to call her, had quickly taken it down when she caught him looking. But that was years ago, he said, more to himself than to the girl. 8 years, Eliza replied. They think I am dead. Mason sat back on his heels, mind racing. This couldn't be happening. The girl had been missing since 2017. She had to be a young woman now, not the child he was seeing. I'm getting you out, Alkin, said, pushing away his confusion. Then we recalling the sheriff. The girl's face changed, fear washing over her features. No, Sheriff Dawson was there, the night they put me here. Mason stared down into the darkness at the face looking back at him. He thought of Afghanistan, of the village where they'd have found children hidden in root cellars after the militia had come through. He thought of how some truths remained buried because too many powerful people needed them to stay that way. He thought of his own nightmares, and how they had finally begun to subside in the quiet of this place. Just hold on, he told Eliza. I won't let anyone hurt you again. As he rose to get rope from his truck, Mason glanced toward town. The water tower gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the church bells began to toll the hour. 4 o'clock. The same time they rang every day in Millridge, steady and reliable, marking the passage of time in a place where some secrets were never meant to surface. Mason knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones like old shrapnel, that his days of hiding from the world were over. Whatever peace he'd found in this quiet corner of Kentucky had just been shattered by a voice from a sealed well and a town as buried sin. He looked down at his hands. They were steady for the first time in years. By nightfall, Eliza Corwin lay wrapped in Mason's spare blankets on his couch, her slight frame barely making an impression on the cushions. He'd managed to rig a harness from rope and lower himself into the well, working by flashlight to free her from where she'd been trapped all these years. Her legs were atrophied, her skin nearly translucent, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Mason think of the wounded wild things he'd sometimes find in the woods. You need a hospital, he had told her once she was safely above ground. She'd clutched his arm with surprising strength. They'll send me back. Now, as Mason heated soup on his ancient stove, he kept glancing at her through the doorway. Something wasn't right. The math didn't add up. Missing since 2017, she should be around 20 now. But the girl on his couch couldn't be older than 13. He brought her the soup, set it on the coffee table. You need to tell me what happened, Eliza. She stared at the steaming bowl, then at him. You are not from here. That is why you helped me. I inherited this place from my uncle, Jesse Tate. Recognition flickered in her eyes. The quiet man, with the limp. She paused. He knew, but he didn't do anything either. Mason felt a stab of something, disappointment, anger, at the thought of his uncle's complicity in whatever had happened to this girl. Knew what exactly? Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for the soup. About the Founders Pact. The words meant nothing to Mason, but the way she said them like they were poisonous made him uneasy. Eat first, he said. Then we'll talk. While she ate, Mason went to his bedroom and retrieved the lockbox from under his bed. Inside was his service pistol, a Beretta M9 he'd kept legally registered. He checked it, loaded it, and tucked it into the back of his jeans. Whatever was happening, he wasn't taking chances. When he returned, Eliza had finished half the soup. Some color had returned to her face, making the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced. You were a soldier, she said, not a question. Mason nodded. How could you tell? The way you move, like you were always expecting something to happen. She set the bowl down. And the nightmares. Mason stiffened. What about them? I heard you, some nights, when I was in the well. She looked down at her hands. The ground carries sound. Your house is built on limestone. The thought of his private torments reaching her in that dark hole unsettled him. What else had she heard over the years? What had she seen from her underground prison? Tell me about the Founders Pact, he said, changing the subject. Eliza's face closed like a shutter. Millridge was founded in 1843, she recited, as if from a textbook. 7 families established the town after leaving Tennessee over a land dispute. They made a pact to protect each other no matter what. Her voice dropped. Every generation, they renew it. How? She looked at him, and in that moment she seemed ancient. They need someone to carry the town as sins, a vessel. Mason thought of Afghanistan again, of tribal practices and beliefs that had survived centuries, of the things people would do when they believed their way of life depended on it. And they chose you. Eliza nodded. My mother wasn't it from here. She married my father, but she was always an outsider. When she died, her voice caught. They said I was marked, that I had her blood. When did they put you in the well? After the drought started, 2017. Sheriff Dawson came to our house with Reverend White and Mayor Hollister. They told my father it was time. Her eyes filled with tears. He didn't even argue. Mason felt sick. And no one looked for you? They put out flyers, pretended to search, but everyone knew. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They sealed me in the well on the night of the Founders' Festival, said my sacrifice would bring the rain back. But you survived. The well has an underwater spring. I could drink. Sometimes people would drop food down. She shrugged as if this small mercy meant nothing. Mostly, I learned to be hungry. Mason stood, pacing the small living room. None of this made sense. A town conspiracy, a child sacrificed for rain, and the fact that she should be years older than she appeared. Eliza, what year is it? She looked confused. 2025. And you? Have been in that well since 2017? She nodded. You should be 20 now, but you look the same, she finished for him. I know. Time is different down there. In the dark. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I counted days at first, then I stopped. Mason remembered the missing persons flyer. The girl in the photo had been the same one he pulled from the well today. Unchanged. A knock at the door made them both jump. Mason motioned for Eliza to stay quiet as he moved to the window, carefully peering out. Sheriff Dawson stood on his porch, hat in hand. Behind him, 2 deputies waited by their cruisers. Tate, the sheriff called. Need to have a word with you about that broken water main. Mason felt Eliza's presence behind him, her hand gripping the back of his shirt. He knows, she whispered. Someone saw you. Mason thought of Mrs. Leary, whose property bordered his to the east. How she had been watching him through binoculars when he first moved in, keeping tabs on the newcomer. Hide in my bedroom, and he told Eliza. Lock the door. Dondi come out until I tell you. After she disappeared down the hall, Mason took a deep breath, tucked his pistol under a cushion within easy reach, and opened the front door. Sheriff Dawson was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that never seemed to blink enough. Evening, Tate. Sorry to bother you so late. No problem, Sheriff. What can I do for you? Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Got a report you might be uncovered something on your property today. An old well? Mason kept his face neutral. That is right. Never knew it was there. Must have been covered up before I inherited the place. Those old wells can be dangerous. Thought I'd check it out, make sure everything is safe. Dawson tried to peer past Mason into the house. Mind if I come in? Getting eaten alive by mosquitoes out here. Actually, I was just turning in. Early start tomorrow. Mason stepped onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. But I can show you the well in the morning if you would like. Something flickered across Dawson's face. Suspicion, maybe anger. Find anything interesting in that well, Tate? Just old stones and stagnant water, Mason replied evenly. Why do you ask? The sheriff studied him, then glanced at the deputies waiting by the cars. Millridge has a history with its water sources. They were sacred to the town, in a way. Is that so? Been good to have you here, Tate. Town appreciates a veteran. Dawson put his hat back on. Your Uncle Jesse was a real pillar of the community. Understood how things work around here. The threat wasn't way subtle. Mason thought of his uncle, of the man's apparent knowledge of what had happened to Eliza, of his silence. "I'm my own man, Sheriff." Dawson nodded slowly. "That you are, for now." He turned to go, then stopped. "Oh, almost forgot. Found something of yours in town today." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of dog tags, Mason's dog tags, which he kept in a drawer by his bed. The ones that had been with him through 2 tours. "Where did you get those?" Mason asked, ice forming in his veins. "Like I said, found them." Dawson dropped them into Mason's palm. "Sleep tight, soldier. We'll talk again real soon." As the sheriff walked away, Mason closed his fist around the tags. They'd have been in his house this morning. The only way Dawson could have them is if someone had been inside while Mason was working on the water line. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe, not even the sanctuary he built for himself. Mason went back inside, locked the door, and slid a chair under the handle. Then he checked every window, securing the house as best he could. When he found Eliza in his bedroom, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a faded photograph in her hands. "I found this," she said, holding it up. A black and white image of 7 men standing in front of a well, the same well Mason had uncovered today. Written on the back in faded ink, "The vessels sleep so Millridge may thrive. 1843 forever." Mason took the photo, studied the faces of the men, their solemn expressions, their certainty. "We need to leave," he said. "Tonight." Eliza looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dim bedroom light. "They'll never let us go." They left at 3 in the morning when Mason judged the town would be at its most vulnerable, that liminal hour when even the most vigilant guards grow heavy-eyed. He packed light, some clothes for Eliza, water, food, his pistol, and the photo she found. His truck, an aging Ford F-150, started on the first try, and they rolled down his gravel driveway with the headlights off, guided only by moonlight. "We'll head east," Mason told her as they reached the main road. "Well, I've got a buddy in Cincinnati who wanted to ask questions." Eliza said nothing, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. She hadn't spoken much since their encounter with the sheriff. Mason worried about her mental state. 8 years in darkness would break most adults, let alone a child. As they approached the town limits, Mason slowed the truck. Something wasn't right. The road ahead was dark. Too dark. The streetlights that normally illuminated Millridge's welcome sign were out. "And they waiting," Eliza said, breaking her silence. Mason pulled over, killing the engine. "How do you know?" "Because I tried to leave before." Her voice was flat, emotionless. 2 years after they put me in the well, a hiker found me. Luke Chambers. He tried to take me to the state police. She turned to look at Mason, her face ghostly in the darkness. "They caught us at Briar's Bridge. Luke disappeared. I went back in the well." Mason gripped the steering wheel, processing this new information. "So there are other ways out of town?" "Through the old mining roads, but they'll be watching those too." Then we create a diversion. Mason started the truck again. "I'm going to drop you at the edge of the forest. There's an old hunter's cabin about a mile in. My uncle used it during deer season. You hide there while I lead them on a chase in the opposite direction. They'll kill you. They can try." He gave her a grim smile. "I've survived worse." Mason drove to the forest's edge and helped Eliza out of the truck. She was stronger now, but still unsteady on her legs. He gave her his jacket, too large but warm, and a flashlight. "Head straight in until you reach a creek. Follow it upstream and you will find the cabin. Stay there until I come for you." Eliza clutched his arm. "What if you done it come back?" Mason removed his dog tags, the ones Dawson had returned, and placed them around her neck. "Then these will help you prove your story. Find someone outside Millridge. Someone who listen." As she disappeared into the trees, Mason felt a heaviness settle over him. He'd known men in combat who carried talismans, lucky coins, Letters from home, pictures of loved ones, things they believed would protect them. He'd never understood it until now, watching this girl vanish into the darkness with his name around her neck. He drove into town, no longer hiding. Let them come. Millridge at night was a study in small-town stillness. The diner closed, the gas station empty, houses dark except for the occasional porch light. Mason drove slowly down Main Street, making himself visible, a challenge to whoever was watching. They didn't keep him waiting long. Blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, then red. Soon his truck was illuminated by the headlights of multiple vehicles as a voice over a loudspeaker ordered him to pull over. Mason complied, bringing the truck to a stop in front of the town hall. A deliberate choice. Let the whole town witness whatever happened next. Sheriff Dawson approached, flanked by his deputies. Behind them, other figures emerged from the shadows. Men in civilian clothes, carrying shotguns and rifles. The town's self-appointed guardians. "Step out of the vehicle, Tate," Dawson ordered. Mason did, hands raised slightly. "Quite a reception, Sheriff. All this for a broken water main?" "Where is she?" Dawson demanded. "Who?" The sheriff's hand twitched toward his sidearm. "Dante played dumb with me, son, the Corwin girl. Where is she?" "I don't know what you were talking about." A new figure stepped forward, an older man in a suit with a clerical collar visible beneath his jacket. Reverend White, Mason assumed. "Mr. Tate," the Reverend said, his voice soft but carrying in the night air. "You've disturbed something you don't understand. Something sacred." "Sacred?" Mason laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet street. "You sealed a child in a well, called it a sacrifice." Murmurs ran through the gathered crowd. Not everyone looked comfortable with the confrontation. Good. There were cracks in their unity. "The vessel preserves Millridge," Reverend White explained as if to a slow child. "She carries our burdens, our sins. It has been our way since the founding. She's a human being, a child." "She is much more than that," the Reverend said. "Surely you've noticed she hasn't aged. That is the power of the well, of the pact." Mason thought of Eliza's unnaturally youthful appearance, the impossibility of it. "You'd be insane, all of you. The drought of 2017 nearly destroyed this town." Mayor Hollister spoke up, a thin man with nervous hands. "Crops failed. The reservoir dried up. Then we renewed the pact, and the rains returned." "Coincidence, is it?" Sheriff Dawson gestured around them. "Millridge thrives, while counties all around us struggle. Our crops grow, our people prosper, our children stay healthy, at the cost of one child." "A necessary sacrifice." The sheriff's face hardened. "Your uncle understood that. He kept our secret, even when the Chambers boy found her. Jesse knew his duty to this town." Mason felt sick at the confirmation of his uncle's complicity. And what was his reward? Dying alone in that farmhouse? "He died at peace knowing he had protected his home," Reverend White said. "Now where is the girl, Mr. Tate?" "Gone. Somewhere you will never find her." The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "This is your last chance, soldier. Tell us where she is, or face the consequences." Mason tensed, ready for whatever came next. "You know what I saw in Afghanistan, Sheriff? I saw what happens when people convince themselves that cruelty is tradition, that sacrifice is necessary." He looked around at the gathered townspeople. "I saw how easy it is for good people to do evil things when they afraid." A woman pushed forward from the crowd, Miss Grady from the diner, her face twisted with emotion. "It's not just the drought, Mason. It is everything. Cancer rates, birth defects, accidents, all of it." Her voice broke. "My sister's boy was dying of leukemia in 2016. After the vessel was chosen, he went into remission." "Correlation isn't causation," Mason said gently. "You believe because you need to." "She asks not the first," another voice called out. An elderly man stepped forward, leaning on a cane. "There has been a vessel in every generation. My grandfather told me about the one from the 1930s. A boy that time. Mentally simple, they said. Horror washed over Mason as the implications became clear. "How many?" he asked. "How many children have you sacrificed over the years?" No one answered, but the silence was damning. "And what happens to them, eventually?" Reverend White cleared his throat. "When a vessel's time is done, they re-released. Their burden lifted." "You mean killed?" Mason translated flatly. "Freed," the Reverend corrected, "when a new vessel is chosen." A terrible understanding dawned on Mason. "So you need Eliza back because it is time for a new sacrifice. You've already chosen your next victim." The crowd's discomfort was palpable now. A woman toward the back began to weep softly. Sheriff Dawson stepped closer. "Enough talk. Where is she, Tate?" "I told you, gone." The sheriff raised his gun. "Then I guess we don't need you anymore." "I wouldn't do that," Mason said calmly. "Not unless you want the state police crawling all over Millridge by sunrise." Dawson hesitated. "What are you talking about?" "I made a call before I came into town. Told a friend everything, about Eliza, about your precious pact, about the missing boy who tried to save her." Mason smiled thinly. "He has instructions to contact the authorities if he doesn't hear from me by dawn." It was a bluff, but one delivered with the conviction of a man who had nothing left to lose. Mason watched doubt flicker across the sheriff's face. "You're lying." "Am I? Take the shot and find out." The standoff stretched, tension thickening the air. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of church bells. 4 tolls, clear and resonant, cutting through the night. 4 a.m. But the church bells never rang at 4 in the morning. Everyone turned toward the sound. Everyone except Mason, who kept his eyes on Sheriff Dawson. "That is not possible," the Reverend whispered. "Who is ringing the bells?" A young deputy came running up the street. "Sheriff, there is something at the church. Something you need to see." "What is it, Hayes?" The deputy's face was ashen. "It's, children, sir. In the bell tower. Dozens of them." "What are you talking about? What children?" "The vessels," the deputy said, voice cracking. "All of them. The missing ones from every generation. They in the bell tower, ringing the bells." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Some began to back away. Others made signs of the cross. Mason looked toward the church steeple, visible above the rooftops. In the pre-dawn light, he could just make out small figures moving in the bell tower. Impossible figures. Children who should have been long dead. "It's her," Reverend White said, his composure cracking. "The Corwin girl. She's broken the pact." Sheriff Dawson lowered his gun, face pale. "What happens if the pact is broken?" The Reverend had no answer. None of them did. As the bells continued to toll, Mason backed toward his truck. No one tried to stop him. They were all staring at the church, at the impossible sight of the past coming back to haunt them. Mason started the engine and drove away, heading for the forest where he'd left Eliza. But as he reached the town limits, he found her standing by the road, waiting for him. Behind her, shadowy figures flickered in and out of visibility, children of various ages, their forms translucent in the growing light. "What have you done?" he asked as she climbed into the truck. Eliza's eyes were older than her face, filled with a knowing that chilled Mason to his core. He's shown them what they've buried. All of us. She looked back at the town. They need to see. "Those children in the bell tower. Echoes," she said simply. "Like me." Mason drove away from Millridge, the sound of bells fading behind them. In the rearview mirror, he saw the first drops of rain begin to fall on the town. Not the gentle rain of blessing, but the cold, hard rain of judgment. Eliza leaned her head against the window, exhaustion finally claiming her. Mason's dog tags glinted around her neck in the early morning light. "You were never going to Cincinnati," she murmured, half asleep. "Were you?" Mason thought of the coordinates he'd memorized long ago. The location of a certain well in the mountains, mentioned in his uncle and aunt's papers. A well said to be even older than Millridge. No, he admitted. I am taking you somewhere else, somewhere I'll never find you. Eliza nodded, as if she'd always known. There are others, she whispered before sleep took her. Other towns, other wells, other children. Mason tightened his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of her words settle on him like a mantle. This was not over, not by a long shot. I know, he said softly, and they wouldn't be forgotten either. 3 days later, Mason stood at the edge of another well, this one carved into the living rock of the Appalachian foothills. Unlike the one on his property, this well had never been sealed. Water glimmered at its depths, catching the late afternoon sunlight. This is it? Eliza asked, standing beside him. She looked stronger now, her skin less pallid, though the haunted look in her eyes remained. According to my Uncle Xi's journal, Mason confirmed. He'd found the leather-bound book hidden beneath a floorboard in the cabin, its pages filled with Jesse Tate's cramped handwriting. A confession of sorts. A map to redemption. He called it the Mother Well. Eliza knelt by the stone rim, peering down. It feels different. My uncle wrote that this well was here before the settlers came, before anyone came. Mason flipped through the journal to a passage he demarked. The native people would not drink from it, but they protected it. Said it was a door. A door to what? Mason shook his head. He never said. They'd driven for hours after leaving Millridge, following dirt roads into increasingly remote territory. No one had pursued them, as far as Mason could tell. Perhaps the town was still too shocked by what had happened, by the revelation of their buried sins, to mount a chase. Or perhaps they were afraid of what Eliza had become. She wasn't just a child anymore. Mason had seen the evidence of that during their journey. The way electronics malfunctioned around her, the way animals grew still when she passed, the way she sometimes spoke in voices not her own. The well had changed her, marked her in ways that went beyond the physical, and she wasn't the only one. The spectral children who had appeared in Millridge had followed them, occasionally visible in Mason Saku's peripheral vision, silent witnesses to their journey. What happens now? Eliza asked, standing again. Mason looked at the journal in his hands. The final pages detailed a ritual, a reversal of what had been done to Eliza and the others, a way to break the cycle permanently. According to this, we need to return what was taken. He met her eyes. Your time, their lives. How? Mason gestured to the well. You have to go back in, one last time. Fear flashed across Eliza's face. No, I can Not like before, he assured her quickly. Just a submersion. With this. He pulled a small object from his pocket, a tarnished silver locket he had found among his Uncle's possessions. Inside was a lock of dark hair. It belonged to the first vessel, from 1843. Eliza took the locket, studying it. And this will free us? All of us? That is what he believed. Mason hesitated. But Eliza, there is something else. A price. There is always a price, she said with a wisdom no child should possess. Mason nodded grimly. Someone has to take your place, to carry the burden until it dissipates naturally. You? It should be someone from Millridge, someone who participated. Mason looked away. But they not here, and we can wait. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. That is why you brought me here. You have already decided. It was true. Mason had made his choice the moment he read his Uncle's final confession. How Jesse had helped conceal Luke Chambers' disappearance. How he'd known about Eliza but done nothing to save her. How the guilt had eaten away at him until cancer had finished the job. I've seen what war does to people, Mason said quietly. How it changes them. Makes good men do terrible things out of fear or loyalty or just to survive. He looked at the well, then back at Eliza. I came home carrying that weight. Might as well make it count for something. It should be them, Eliza insisted. The sheriff, the reverend, the mayor, they did this, and they all answer for it, Mason promised. But not today. Today, we free you and the others. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. According to the journal, the ritual needed to be performed at dusk, the boundary between day and night between one state and another. "Are you ready?" he asked. Eliza clutched the locket tightly. Around them, the air grew still as the ghostly children gathered, visible now even in direct sight. Dozens of them from different eras, all bearing the same hollow-eyed look of those who had carried a town's sins. "What will happen to you?" she asked. Mason thought of his nightmares, of the faces that haunted him from Afghanistan, the villagers who had died because of decisions he made, the children caught in crossfire. More of the same, probably, just with different ghosts. He helped her to the edge of the well, then lowered a rope ladder he brought for this purpose. "You will climb down until you reach the water. Submerge completely with the locket. Say the names of as many of the others as you can remember. And then? And then you climb back up. A free girl." Eliza searched his face, perhaps looking for deception. Finding none, she nodded and began her descent. Mason watched until she reached the water, its surface black in the fading light. She looked up at him one last time, then clutched the locket to her chest and sank beneath the surface. Mason began to recite the words from his uncle's journal, a strange mixture of Latin and something older, phrases that felt awkward on his tongue. As he spoke, the air around the well began to shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement. The ghostly children drew closer, their forms becoming more solid with each word Mason spoke. Their eyes, all fixed on him, contained centuries of pain and loneliness. Mason continued the incantation, feeling something shift in the air around him, a pressure building, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. His skin prickled and the dog tags he'd given Eliza, now returned to his neck, grew cold against his chest. Beneath the water, Eliza's voice rose, distorted but clear enough. Names, one after another. Children from across the decades. Each name sent a ripple across the well's surface, and with each ripple, one of the spectral children seemed to grow more substantial. Catherine Wells, 1843. Thomas Grady, 1867. Sarah Miller, 1892. The list continued, spanning generations of sacrifices. Children chosen because they were different, or vulnerable, or simply convenient. Vessels for a town's collective fear and guilt. Mason felt a heaviness beginning to settle into his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the evening air, the burden transferring. When Eliza finally emerged from the water, she looked transformed. The gauntness was gone from her face. Her eyes were clear, free of the haunted look they carried since he found her. She climbed the ladder with surprising strength. As she reached the top, Mason helped her over the edge. Her skin was warm now, alive. She looked at the ghostly children surrounding them, and for the first time she smiled. "They were ready," she said. One by one, the spectral children began to fade, not into nothingness, but into something brighter. Their forms dissipating like morning mist in sunlight, leaving behind only the briefest impressions of faces finally at peace. All except one. A boy about Eliza's age remained, his form more substantial than the others had been. "Luke," Eliza whispered. The boy nodded, then turned his gaze to Mason. "You carry it now," he said, his voice sounding distant, as if coming from across a great expanse. "All of it." Mason nodded, feeling the weight of it all settling deeper. Heavier. "I know. Not just Millridge's sins," Luke continued. "There are others, other towns, other wells, other vessels." "I'll find them," Mason promised. Luke looked at Eliza one last time, something passing between them that Mason couldn't interpret. Then he too faded away, the last of the ghosts to find release. In the silence that followed, Mason became aware of a burning sensation against his chest, He pulled out his dog tags, finding them glowing with a dull red heat. On the metal, new names were appearing alongside his own, etching themselves into the surface. Names of children, the vessels he now carried. "What happens now?" Eliza asked, wrapping her arms around herself. Though the ritual had strengthened her, she was still a child who had lost 8 years of her life to darkness and fear. Mason removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "First, we get you somewhere safe. I have a friend in Louisville, a nurse I served with. She can help us get you new papers, a new start." "And Millridge?" Mason's jaw tightened. "They don't get to forget. Not this time." He thought of the evidence he'd gathered. His uncle's journal, the photograph of the founding families, Eliza herself. Enough to bring scrutiny down on Millridge like a hammer. Not just local authorities, but federal. The kind of investigation that would unearth generations of buried secrets. "And the other towns?" Eliza pressed. "The other children?" Mason touched the dog tags, now cool again but heavier than they'd ever been. The names etched into them seemed to pulse with a life of their own. A reminder, a map. "I'll find them," he repeated. One by one. He would become a different kind of soldier now. One fighting a war most people didn't even know existed. A war against the darkest parts of human nature. The willingness to sacrifice the vulnerable for the illusion of safety. As they walked away from the well, Mason felt something inside him shift and settle. The burden finding its place. His nightmares would be different now. No longer the dry heat and dust of Afghanistan, but the cold depths of wells and the faces of children he had yet to save. Eliza took his hand as they reached his truck. "You'll come back for me? When it's over?" Mason looked down at her, this child who had endured what would have broken most adults. Who had emerged not just surviving, but somehow still capable of hope. "I promise." He helped her into the passenger seat, then paused before closing the door. "Eliza, there is something I need to know. The drought in 2017, the cancer remissions, all the things Millridge attributed to the sacrifice. Was any of it real?" She considered the question, her face solemn in the gathering darkness. The power was real. The well, it changes things, but not the way they thought. She touched the silver locket still clutched in her hand. It wasn't our suffering that protected them. It was their belief that they were protected. "Faith," Mason said, understanding, "not magic." "Belief is its own kind of magic," Eliza replied. "Powerful enough to build towns, to justify unforgivable things." She looked at him, eyes suddenly ancient again. Powerful enough to save too, if directed toward something worth believing in. As they drove away from the well, Mason glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment he thought he saw figures standing at the edge. Not the spectral children, but men in old-fashioned clothes. The founding families of Millridge, perhaps, watching their legacy crumble. 6 months later, Mason stood on the porch of a small house outside Louisville, watching Eliza tend to the garden she planted. She was flourishing under the care of his friend Sarah, growing and learning and slowly reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from her. The investigation into Millridge was ongoing, but already the town was transforming. Sheriff Dawson and several town elders were in custody. Others had fled. The church stood empty, its bells silent. And Mason, he was preparing for another journey. The names on his dog tags had led him to a small town in West Virginia, where children had been disappearing for generations, where an old well sat forgotten behind the town hall. Eliza looked up from her gardening, sensing his gaze. In the warm spring sunlight she appeared almost normal, almost untouched by the horrors she'd endured. But Mason knew better, knew that some wounds never fully healed. They just became part of who you are. "You were leaving again?" she said, coming to stand beside him. Mason nodded. "There's a girl in West Virginia, 12 years old, missing for 3 months. But not really missing," Eliza guessed. "No, not to everyone." She reached up and touched the dog tags around his neck, her fingers finding the name of the West Virginia girl as if by instinct. When will it end? How many are there? Mason had no answer. The burden he'd taken on that day at the mother well had only grown heavier with time. Each child is name a weight he carried. Each town as sins another layer of darkness. But there was something else too. Something he hadn't expected. A purpose. A clarity that had been missing since he had returned from war. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I made a promise." Eliza nodded, understanding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver locket, the one that had helped free her and the others. "Take this, for the girl." Mason accepted it, feeling its warmth against his palm. "I'll bring her back, like I brought you back." As he prepared to leave, loading his truck with the tools he now carried everywhere, shovels, ropes, maps marked with suspicious wells, Eliza handed him a small, worn teddy bear. One Sarah had given her when she first arrived. "For after," she said simply. "Every child needs something to hold on to." Mason tucked the bear carefully into his bag, next to his Uncle S. journal and the growing file of towns with suspicious histories. The weight of it all, physical and otherwise, should have been crushing. But somehow it wasn't because now he knew what he had in Afghanistan. Exactly who he was fighting for. Exactly what he was fighting against. As he drove away, Mason glanced back one last time at Eliza standing in the sunlight, her hand raised in farewell. A child who had carried a town's darkness and survived. Who had shown him that even the deepest wells could be escaped, given enough courage and help. The dog tags around his neck clinked softly as the truck hit a bump in the road. Names of children waiting to be found. Waiting to be freed. And you, if you found such a well, if you heard such a voice calling from the darkness, would you have the courage to look inside, to reach down, to bring them into the light, no matter the cost to yourself?